Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Maple Grove Scripture Reading Podcast. So last time we were in chapter 38. We've been in the part where God has been speaking to Job, and we were looking at verses 8 through 18, where God kept pressing Job with questions about things that he had no part in making and no ability to explain. Things like who contained the sea when it burst forth, or who set the limit that the proud waves still obey. Has Job ever ordered the dawn to appear or watched it shake the wicked out of the earth like shaking a tablecloth? And then he talked about the depths and the gates of death, the far reaches of creation that Job has never visited. And every question, of course, had the same answer, that Job really had no understanding of any of these. Well, today we're going to still be in chapter 38. We're going to look at verses 19 through 30, and the questions are going to keep coming. So let me read through that. What is the way to the abode of light, and where does darkness reside? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the paths to their dwellings? Surely you know, for you are already born. You've lived so many years. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain and a path for the thunderstorm, to water a land where no one lives, an uninhabited desert, to satisfy a desolate wasteland, and to make it sprout with grass? Does the rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens, when the waters become hard as stone, when the surface of the deep is frozen? Now, God opens by asking where light lives and where darkness goes. When the sun sets, where does the light go? When dawn breaks, where does the darkness retreat? Can you take them to their places? Do you know the path to their homes? Job watches the sun rise and set every day, and he's got no account of any of it. He can't explain the daily movement of light. He can't tell you where the darkness goes when the dawn comes, or where it comes from when the sun sets. These are things that happen around him constantly, and he's never been able to do anything about them. He didn't cause the last sunrise, and he can't prevent the next sunset. And then God says this, surely you know, for you were already born. You've lived so many years. Now, God's laying the sarcasm on pretty thick here. He's like, you've been alive for decades. Surely you know where the light lives. Now, the point is that Job's entire lifespan barely registers on the scale of how old the cosmos are. Job thinks his years of experience make him qualified to evaluate how things work. God's pointing out that Job is a newcomer to this. The systems that he's been questioning were running long before he existed to notice them. God is showing him just how new he is. And then there's this. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow, or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve for times of trouble, for days of war and battle? So he's saying snow and hail have storehouses. God holds them in reserve, not deployed randomly, but kept, saved, and then released at the right moment for specific purposes. And you can see this in Scripture. You've got the hail plague in Egypt and the battle at Gibeon in Joshua 10, where more Amorites die from hailstones than from Israelite swords. It wasn't a coincidence. God opened the storehouses. Nothing in creation operates outside his management, and weather is included in that. The storm that seems to come from nowhere was in storage, waiting for the right moment. God's not surprised by the weather because he's the one who stocked the storehouses. Now, snow is actually worth looking at a little more closely, because if you've ever seen snow crystals under like a magnifying glass, every single snowflake is this intricate crystalline structure with extraordinary detail and an almost endless variation in form. Researchers have cataloged dozens of distinct crystal shapes and compared the variety favorably to the variety that you'd find in flowers. Even the weapons God reserves for war are works of art, down to the individual flake. He continues, who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain and a path for the thunderstorm, to water a land where no one lives, an uninhabited desert, to satisfy a desolate wasteland and make it sprout with grass. Now think about somebody who takes care of a large piece of property. You got a farm or just a big piece of land. And imagine that you find out that they water the back corner past the fence line, deep in the overgrown section that nobody ever walks through. There's no crop back there. There's no trail. Nobody will ever see it. But they water it anyway because it's theirs, and they take care of all of it. That's what God is describing here. He sends rain to water land where nobody lives, to satisfy a desolate wasteland, to make it sprout with grass. Nobody will see it. No farmer will harvest it. No traveler will pass through and be grateful. But he does it anyway. Now, most of us would carry a picture of God's providence that's very human-centered. And that's not on purpose necessarily. It's just practical, right? Rain matters because it waters our crops. Sun matters because it warms our homes. We organize our understanding of God's care around what affects us. Well, when something doesn't serve a visible human purpose, we tend to assume that it falls outside the scope of God's attention. We think of his provision as being aimed at people and assume everything else is incidental. And God says, I water the wilderness, but it's not for you. It's because it's mine, because every piece of this creation is under my care, not just the parts that you can see or use. His concern for creation doesn't just end at the edge of human habitation. The God who tends to the wilderness that nobody visits is the same God who tends to the parts of your life no one else can see, the hidden places, the things that you're carrying that nobody knows about. Job's been arguing that God has stopped paying attention to him, but a God who goes out of his way to water desolate places where nobody lives is not a God who has stopped paying attention. His attention isn't conditional on whether anybody's watching or benefiting. He cares for the wasteland. He makes it sprout. And that's a bigger God than Job has been imagining. And then God asks about the origins of the most ordinary things. Does rain have a father? Who fathers the drops of dew? From whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost from the heavens? Now, some of you might be thinking, well, we know how rain forms. We understand the water cycle, right? The evaporation, the condensation, the pressure systems, all that. We know how ice forms. So what's the force of the question? Well, the question isn't asking for the meteorological explanation of this. Like, the mechanism is the how, but God is asking about the who. Who designed that process? Who created the conditions that make it work? Who keeps it running without fail every single day, everywhere on earth, simultaneously? Knowing the science doesn't answer that. In fact, every new thing we discover about how weather works only deepens the question of who built a system that intricate and that beautiful. The more we understand the mechanism, the more we should be asking about the one who designed it. Rain has a father. Dew has a father. Ice comes from a womb. God is the source behind all of it. He's the father of the rain, the one from whose hand frost comes, the one who hardens the surface of the deep. These are acts of a person, not a machine running on its own. And Job has no part in any of it. He didn't father the rain. He can't explain dew. He didn't design the water cycle or set the temperature at which water freezes. He's been standing inside a creation that he didn't make, tended by a God that he hasn't fully seen, trying to judge a situation that he can only see from one small corner. God isn't answering the suffering question yet, but he is addressing what's underneath it. Job's assumption that he knows enough to say how things should have gone, that the picture he can see from where he stands is complete enough to evaluate whether the one running it all made the right call. And it isn't. The rain alone proves that. The dew by itself proves it. Every drop of water that Job has ever drunk arrived through a system that God designed, sustains, and runs. And Job has never once been consulted about how it works. Next time, we're going to stay in chapter 38. We're going to go through verses 31 through 38. And God's going to keep with questions, this time asking about the stars and the clouds. Hope you have a great day, and we'll talk again soon. God bless.